Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and this is my breakdown that I'm tentatively calling the series as a whole, tentatively calling Thoughts and Theories, because I want to talk about both my opinions and my ideas about what's going on, and generally speaking, the series of events from episode to episode, but I also want to discuss possible theories, both short-term and long-term, of where the plot and narrative may or may not be going. So I'm quite looking forward to fleshing this kind of concept out a little bit further. You guys really seem to respond quite positively to this more natural, kind of off-the-cuff way of interacting and discussing the events of the TV show, which is great. I'm happy to go ahead and keep doing this. So we're now going to tackle episode 2. I've made some very brief notes, but I'm going to extrapolate on those notes quite dramatically. So with all of that said, roll the intro. So again, very much in line with what I did with the first episode, this is not going to be done in a chronological sense. It's not going to be done as each scene progresses one after the other. I'm actually kind of grouping the scenes together into larger kind of coherent blocks because it makes talking about those particular series of events a little bit more palatable as opposed to jumping back and forth between characters. Again, you guys seem to be responding quite positively to that, so that's great. So we're going to kick off at the beginning with Halsey, but we're going to flesh out all of Halsey's bits before we move on to the next parts of the story. So Halsey's being held somewhere, as we established in the previous episode, and is trying to gain information from this same individual over and over again. Now, I can only assume at this point, because of the technology and because of my knowledge of the law, this is a Flash clone that's being sent in, and they seem to be dying quite abruptly there afterwards. Now, this is very in line with Flash clones because of how fast and imperfect the clones are when they're grown. You can literally mature an embryo to a fully grown human being well beyond birthing age, as we see here, in just a few months. So you can have these kind of on backlog and just really rapidly pump out these clones, which is kind of creepy, to be honest. But she's trying to gain information from this Flash clone, and the girl is speaking of the man, which I can only assume, given the use of Flash clones and the man, she's talking about Ackerson. So Ackerson is obviously involved in Halsey's quote-unquote imprisonment, her being held, and this Flash clone, which is hilarious considering the fact that he was against and opposed to all of the methods that she used in the Spartan program. Apologies. Particularly for the kidnap of children and the replacement of those children with Flash clones. And yet here he is using Flash clones. And he plans on making a Spartan program. So really, although he's appalled by Halsey's actions, he is basically doing exactly what Halsey did. Which is, again, as we've kind of established in the previous episode, it seems like Ackerson is on kind of the trackway to being a narcissist, and we established quite clearly in the first season that Halsey was most definitely a narcissist. So they're basically two sides of the same coin. They're, oddly enough, they're perfect for each other. Anyway, moving on from that, so the girl is a Flash clone, and I was wondering if this could be a form of torture, so to speak, on Ackerson's part, using a Flash cloned child that's going to come in and die in front of her just over and over and over again. You would expect to have to sit there and watch. I would assume, just judging by sort of what she looks like, she's perhaps between the ages of maybe 14 and 16. Seeing that individual die over and over and over again in front of you, even if you don't have a direct knowledge and relationship and rapport with this individual, you're still going to feel some kind of way about that. So it's a form of torture, but the problem there is that, as we've established, Halsey is more than likely a narcissist. And narcissists, by their very definition, lack empathy to other human beings, which means, in spite of this, it's not really going to be having that much of an effect on her. And that's telegraphed both in the previous episode and in this episode, where when this clone's dying, she just kind of slumps back in a chair and goes, "What's the point of this?" It's because she doesn't really care. Moving on from that, the room is actually revealed later on in the episode as being actually a holographic cell of sorts, so using holographic projectors to build kind of a virtual environment that looks photorealistic and looks real, for lack of a better word. Which again is in line with what we've established in the lore, because that's exactly what all of the multiplayer is in the extended lore, because the multiplayer is on the battle simulation deck of the UNSC Infinity, the wargame simulations. So if they can simulate combat to that level of fidelity that Spartans can't tell the difference between that and real life, seems reasonable that they'd employ the same technology in this regard, particularly in the possession and torturing of high-profile captives, prisoners. So there's an interesting back and forth between these, and what's really interesting is it's then revealed shortly thereafter that Axon has both the relic and Cortana in his possession. The relic doesn't respond to his touch, so he's evidently not a reclaimer, and Cortana is speaking on simulations that she's run that have 97% failure rate, basically, that no matter what happens, whatever this is going to happen. Now, it's obviously pointing towards how the war with the Covenant is going to go. Now, this kind of mirrors the Carver findings in the lore. So the Carver findings were done by Professor Elias Carver, who did an in-depth statistical analysis into the human empire in the 26th century, and found that the disparate colonies within the outer colonies and their civil unrest, and the fact that they wanted to be self-governed and not governed by the United Earth government from within the inner colonies, who really only look after the vested interests of the inner colonies, all of that was going to boil over to a point where, at best, humanity goes into full-blown civil war, billions are dead, probably the use of thermonuclear weapons, and yeah, basically like a kind of a mass reset for humanity. Worst case scenario, complete and utter apocalypse of the human empire. Almost nothing left. And the Carver findings were refined by Dr. Halsey, and with her predictions and her statistical analysis correcting for some mistakes that Carver made, she found it was going to happen a damn sight sooner than was initially expected, and that's what ultimately led to the creation of the Spartan program. This simulation seems similar on the basis of that, but is an advancement of it, so to speak, where it's taken into consideration how the war's going, how fast colonies are falling, the knowledge that they have, loose as it may be at this point, of the Covenant, and basically predictions on whether or not humanity are going to survive the Covenant attacking. And the predictions are pretty grim. The predictions clearly outline that humanity are going away. If the Covenant attack reach, humanity are doomed. It's as simple as that. Now, I can't be entirely certain here, but when this information is revealed to Axon by Cortana, I can't be certain, but it looks like he gets a little watery in the eyes, which suggests that he has some emotional motivations, some personal motivations behind why he wants to avoid that. But of course, at this stage, we just don't know what that personal motivation is. I could be wrong. It could just be the way that the lighting is in the scene, or whatever the case may be. I'm not entirely sure, but it suggests towards some personal motivations, but we'll see. Sticking with Ackerson, obviously Ackerson wants to create his Spartan 3 program. We know that from the extended lore. He wants to create Spartan 3s as cheaper, more disposable Spartans, that are, just as he does in the mainline canon. But the things that are inhibiting that at the moment is the fact that the Spartan 2 program is in place, and his kind of attempt to tarnish the Spartan program in some degree, to demonstrate perhaps that the Master Chief is unstable, is probably done in a manner to clear the way for the Spartan 3 program, to allow him to push forward. That's what his goal has been in the mainline lore, and seems to be the goal during the Silver Timeline as well. This is very much in line with the Office of Naval Intelligence manipulations, and further on from this, he seems to be attempting to divide and conquer, because he seems to be trying to bring Kai into the fold. He probably likely sees her as a potential asset, because she's obviously, she seems quite diligent. She seems to be following his suggestion, his orders. She seems a little bit more quote-unquote controllable by the Office of Naval Intelligence, and obviously that plays into Oni's hand. So he's likely considering her possibly being a viable asset, or maybe even a de facto leader of the Spartan 3 program. I really wouldn't be surprised if that's the kind of direction that things go. Because again, Ackerson and Kai's conversation are calling into question the Chief's mental stability, and she seems receptive to his suggestion. So Chief is unfortunately once again talking about the McKee hallucination. At this point, I'm just running on that assumption that it's a hallucination, simply based on the fact that, like I said in episode 1, she was stood and then turns and walks, and then literally seconds later, a glancing beam strikes the surface exactly where she was stood. I can only assume that this must be a hallucination, which isn't great for a Spartan. It's revealed that Cobalt team have gone missing, which means whatever mission that they were actually sent on has gone wrong. And Chief is willing to go over Ackerson's head to defy the chain of command, basically, in order to get back into active duty and find Cobalt team. It's once again driven forward that Ackerson is doubting the validity of Chief's claims, and that Perez is not corroborating his story, that she has no recollection of the events, and once again drives at this idea that Chief is just a guy in a suit. That's all he is. And the Master Chief isn't the big hero that people make him out to be. He's just a dude wearing a suit of power armor. That's it. But of course, in juxtaposition to that, that's what Ackerson is saying, not necessarily a reflection of the truth, because in the other scenes that we're seeing John being demonstrated as being an exceptional human being, even when he's not wearing the suit, which is true of all Spartans. They are superhuman. They are super soldiers to the nth degree before they even put on the suits of armor. In any case, this particular narrative eventually drives Chief to do some research and finds that Cobalt team weren't sent off-world. They were actually sent to Visegrad Relay. Us fans of Halo Reach will know immediately where Visegrad Relay is and what that's about. We have quite an interesting scene between Chief, Perez, and her family, where he actually sits down to have a meal. The interesting thing about this scene, I think the purpose behind this scene, is actually not necessarily to try to humanize the Chief, or to try to really kind of flesh out the Chief's humanity. I think it's more so to broadcast just how detached the inner colonies are from the struggles of the outer colonies. The outer colonies are being ravaged by the Covenant during this war, and the only propaganda, desperately attempting to keep the morale up and report on things to be going much better than they actually are, mean that the occupants of the inner colonies think that they're winning the war. That's true in mainline lore and in the Silver Timeline here, and I'm afraid the reality is humanity are not winning this war. They are failing. They are losing colony by colony, battle after battle. And this dinner basically broadcasts and demonstrates just how detached the inner colony civilians are from the struggles of the outer colonies, even to the point that they speak of a game called Spartan Assault, which, I wouldn't be surprised as a form of Oni propaganda. They've developed games to trivialize the struggles in the outer colonies to make it seem like the war is a winnable thing, that the Spartans are the ultimate heroes, and that no matter what happens, the Spartans have got it. That might be true on the battlefield, but we also know that generally speaking, the Covenant's modus operandi, once they've conquered whatever assets they need to planet side, will retreat to orbit and just bombard it. Spartans can't really stand up against that. So the awkwardness of this scene both articulates the lack of awareness of how severe things are, and how far humanity are falling, and how badly the war is going, and how far removed civilian life is ultimately from Spartan life. The sitting down and just enjoying a meal in this casual kind of mannerism is not something that Spartans generally do. So the awkwardness that surrounds this entire scene has a purpose. After this particular scene, Chief and Perez end up on a bench discussing the signal and the fact that they could feel it. Now, this may be in reference to how the signal is both causing comms blackouts to keep the colony unaware of the impending attack, but could also be causing these physiological or psychological effects that we seem to be seeing. I say this because the signal seems really low end. There's a lot of infrasound involved with this signal, at least the small parts that we've heard. Now, the interesting thing about infrasound is that at certain wavelengths, infrasound is capable of causing physiological effects of the human body. Very specific frequencies, particularly, as I recall, between about 18 and 19 hertz, really low infrasound. It can cause the liquid within the eye, the vitreous within the eye, to actually reverberate, to almost wiggle in response to this infrasound. And that can cause visual disturbances, which some people have manifestations then of things in their peripheral vision that are there, and then when they turn to look at it, it's gone. It's been the explanation as to why some people feel like they see ghosts and things like that, because it's actually the infrasound is affecting their senses, affecting the fluid in their eyes and causing visual disturbances. Infrasound has been proven to create senses of feelings of dread in your chest and impending doom, feel senses like you're being watched. All of this is just due to being exposed to infrasound at the correct frequencies. And I wonder if perhaps Chief's, what I can only assume is a hallucination of seeing McKee, is actually based solely in infrasound. Again, I'm not saying that's exactly what is going on here, but I'm just saying it may be a motivating factor. It may be something to take into consideration. Chief then imparts a little bit of stoic wisdom about the loss of her fellow soldiers and the grief that comes with it, as something of a loose reassurance to Perez. And again, this is relatively on character for the Master Chief, just saying a few words and people listen. Sticking with the Chief, and Chief eventually decides to take Silver Team on a training mission, but then changes the mission parameters immediately after takeoff and changes their course to Visegrad Relay. Now, it's not unlike Chief to go AWOL particularly like he did in Halo 5, for example, by taking Blue Team to Meridian. And this all seems to be driving in a similar direction to the Halo 5 hunt the truth, traitor kind of narrative that was being pushed during the advertisement phase of Halo 5. Again, that's a different subject altogether, but most definitely the build up to Halo 5. I know Halo 5 released and it was not what a lot of us were expecting it to be, but the advertisement, a Hunt the Truth podcast series, a lot of the traitor adverts, things like that were building up to the release of Halo 5 were pushing this idea that Chief was going to defy orders. He was going to go rogue, he was going to go AWOL, because he believes there to be a greater good that he's striving for, and it requires his due diligence, even if he has to go against direct orders in order to assure that humanity survive this. I'm all here for it. If that's what kind of direction they want to take Master Chief's story, where he is not controllable, he does kind of do what he wants, when he wants, and goes through this little kind of rogue, AWOL kind of character arc, where he realises just how much more important he is than just being a foot soldier, I'm there for it. I was excited back in Halo 5's advertisement campaign for the potential of that storyline. I was absolutely and utterly willing to be behind the Chief and fight every step of the way, even if I have to fight against other human beings in order to see Chief succeed in this greater good. I was there for it then, and I'm there for it now. Now, sticking with Silver Team, we're going to look at Riz, because Riz is in a bad way in this episode. Her injuries from the end of Season 1 are evidently still playing up, and they're actually becoming, to a degree, debilitating. She actually starts to speak to another ex-Spartan about other ways to live as perhaps a non-Spartan. Now, this other Spartan is Lewis. He's actually an ex-Spartan, and he's a washout. He had all of his augmentations and went through the augmentation and came out the other side successfully. The problem is that after a few days, he started to get darkness at the edges of his vision, and that darkness spread and spread and spread until eventually he went blind. Now, this is in line with the occipital capillary reversal augmentation that the Spartan 2s received as part of Project Aster, in that there was a very small risk category of side effects for that particular augmentation, which led to retinal detachment. And his symptoms are in line with the retina detaching from the edges first, all the way down to the centre, and then falling away entirely, rendering him permanently blind. And thus, being permanently blind, he was no longer fit to be a Spartan. It's kind of surprising, given that we're in the 26th century, that there hasn't been augmentations that could either restore vision or give you kind of a version of, like, cybernetic vision or something like that. I'm surprised that isn't a thing in the 26th century in the Halo universe. But in either case, the knock-on effect is clear. He couldn't be a Spartan. He's evidently still strong. He's still got all of the augmentations. He just isn't capable of being an active role Spartan. We get some training missions in this episode before Chief reassigns Silver Team and goes to the Visegrad Relay. And in those training missions, we can see that Riz is struggling significantly. There are lasting effects on her combat capabilities. She's still superhuman, she can still perform at superhuman levels, but she's still lagging behind the other Spartans. She just isn't keeping pace. She actually sees a therapist that seems to treat both physical and mental ailments, because he's talking about the scars not actually being the true source of her pain, but it's something more internal, so to speak. So I believe he's both kind of a physiotherapist and kind of a psychological therapist in a loose manner. And again, all of this seems to be driving towards the idea that Riz is perhaps humouring the idea of a life outside of the Spartan program. And to round out this episode, we know that Quan is on the rubble. She's there through indentured servitude, but she ultimately kills her master, so to speak. She's acting as something of a quiet protector to both Kessler and Liera while Soren is absent. And we finish the episode with Sword Base, which is, as we know, is on Reach, and the Arbiter stroke leader elite that we saw in episode 1 actually being present, and the actual reveal of McKee not actually being just a visual disturbance that only the Chief saw. So I don't understand how or why she's alive. So I really don't know what to make of this now. McKee was shot with an M6C pistol. That's a 50 caliber round, and she was shot in the left shoulder, approximately where her aortic valves are, meaning she should just be dead. That should just be the end of it. I found it curious in Season 1 how when that actually took place, and there's a scene where she's kind of in what I can only describe as the domain representation of a halo with the Chief. She gets that blood appear on her chest, and then she sort of starts to collapse, and John tries to grab her. I found it curious that when they both disconnected effectively from the relic or from the domain or whatever that was, that Chief disappeared from that realm, so to speak, but she didn't. Her body slumped to the ground in the quote-unquote domain. And of course her physical body slumped to the floor in real life as well, but I found it odd that her representation, her kind of psychological representation within the domain didn't disappear, but the Chief's did. I don't particularly like the idea of humouring the possibility that she's some sort of like projection or a manifestation from the domain, that somehow the domain has done something similar to her that happened to Cortana in Halo 5, where it's kind of restored her in a manner of speaking, and now like Makee has like elevated up through the Covenant because she's come back from being quote-unquote dead and now understands Foreigner artifacts better. I don't know. I don't know if I want to humour that particular thread of narrative, but it would at least be one tentatively lore accurate way to explain why Makee was dead and now she's back, if she was in contact with the domain and the domain has somehow restored her, but I don't know how I feel about that. I think it might be a bit too early to explore the metaphysics of the domain at this stage, when really the TV series is only just kind of kicking off in a grand sense of things. So I'm going to reserve my judgment until we know more about what's going on with Makee's journey. But overall, my thoughts on episode 2, very good. It's fleshed out the storyline a little bit further. We're seeing more of the Oni manipulations behind the scenes. The story seems to be pushing towards the idea of the Spartans almost going their separate ways. I've seen a few scenes between Kai and Ackerson, which suggests that Ackerson is almost considering her as a viable asset to either fold into the Office of Naval Intelligence or perhaps lead up the Spartan 3 program, something along those lines. It seems like their relationship is purposefully strengthening episode by episode, and I'm curious to see where that goes. So it feels like Kai is almost on the way out to like Ackerson's side or the Office of Naval Intelligence, or to lead up the Spartan 3. She's basically on a trajectory away from Silver Team. And then Riz has this injury that's affecting her, and she's humouring the idea of a life as a non-Spartan, suggesting she's on a trajectory away from Silver Team. And then obviously the only two that you got left then is Chief and Vanek. I'm unsure what they're planning to do with Vanek's particular storyline, and Chief, obviously, as we know, if this is going to follow even tentatively the mainline lore, Chief ends up being the only active Spartan that makes it to Halo. So it kind of needs to happen. Silver Team need to dissolve, in a manner of speaking, and go their separate ways for Chief to continue and realise his true potential and his true calling, so to speak, at Halo, while Silver Team do their thing. Maybe Kai takes up kind of the pseudo role of Kurt in the mainline lore and leads the Spartan 3s. Riz perhaps follows Maria's kind of path and decides to become a non-Spartan, retire, and maybe raise a family. And Vanek, I don't know. Ackerson's motivations in this episode seem to be they have a personal element. I think there's something going on in the underlying narrative that suggests to some personal motivation, not just in the fact that he's ideologically opposed to Halsey, but there's something else. There's something else there, and I'm not quite keying into what that is yet. And then we have this overarching theme of the Office of Naval Intelligence not believing the Chief, might be playing into this rogue Spartan, AWOL, traitor, hunt the truth kind of esque storyline, which I am totally down for. That will be fantastic. I'm really excited to see how that pans out, if that's where it's going. And we have Quan's storyline somewhat treading water, and then we have Makee, which I don't know what to make of at the moment. On the whole, really enjoyed episode 2. I'm excited to see what you guys have to say about it. Anything that you particularly thought might be pointing in one direction or another. I'd love to hear your theories on where you think this is going, particularly in the case of Chief's story arc and him potentially becoming a rogue Spartan or AWOL, or at least achieving some of his own independence and understanding that he can't be controlled and that he is meant for more. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's happening with Silver Team as a whole. Are they separating? Are we seeing threads of narrative that are sending them in different directions because Chief ultimately needs to go to Halo and the Spartans of Silver Team need to do something else? Love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching this episode. I'll try to get episode 3 recorded when it's released, and I'll get it out to you as quick as possible. So, thanks everyone, and until next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider smashing the like button and leave a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. Big shout out to my patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my installation, Falcon, Prophet Bear, Mikhail, Sophia, and Ashley, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Scarab, Spartan0137, Anthony, Ghost, Aaron, Chris, Jacob, Sean, Element Zero, Somatic, Jordan J3, Dan, Mr. Keys, Directal, Gunslinger, Jacob, Bandmill, Echo, Evermore, Officer Cat, and Personal Devil, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers. And all the other patrons who have jumped aboard to support the channel. It means more to me than I can accurately put into words. Another shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob, Schmitty, Talia, Fenrir and Born Stellar, and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy. Shout out to John for I don't fucking know. And if you want more of this kind of content, hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you don't miss any future videos, and consider jumping aboard yourself as a patron or YouTube member to keep the channel alive and kicking. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.